Hello everyone and welcome back to Newegg TV. I'm Steve and today I'm going to do an overview on this motherboard from ASRock. This is the Z87M OC formula. Okay, a quick look at the front of the box before I open everything up. This is the Z87M, and I believe the M is going to stand for the fact that it's a micro ATX motherboard. So this is great if you have a smaller form factor system you're trying to build, and just make sure that your chassis supports micro ATX. So that being said, let me flip around to the back because this is the OC formula, which does mean that they're kind of throwing at you all the tricks of the trade to give you the best possible overclocking platform. But before I get too much into the overclocking, I want to mention several of the features that are here on the back of the box. First and foremost, it does have an HDMI-In. Benefits of that is that you can actually use the same monitor without having to change sources or anything else and use the computer as a pass-through. It's pretty beneficial. Also, they have a home cloud setup where you can use the Intel's Ethernet port in order to be able to use things like remote wake and other types of things to give you the advantages if you wanted to stay connected to the internet, as well as give your computer the best possible power management available. Also, they have something called Purity Sound, which is a combination of hardware and software solutions to give you just a really solid audio platform for onboard audio. It does come in several different parts, but I'll mention two specific ones they mention here, which is the Realtek ALC1150 chip that's giving you 115 decibel signal noise ratio differential codec, as well as an op-amp from Texas Instruments, specifically the NE5532. Now that's going to be able to give you a little extra power to drive those drivers in your headphones. If you have something as powerful as 600 ohm resistance headphones, you're going to be able to power them with this particular setup. So down closer to the bottom, we have the OC formula kit, which is inclusive to all the different things they're trying to do to provide for you the most reliable power and I guess the best platform basically to overclock your CPU, as well as your memory. First and foremost, they have premium alloy chokes, they have Digi Power, as well as a 12 power phase design, multiple filter capacitors, and a dual stack MOSFET. All of these things coming together to give you just kind of the cleanest possible power, as well as the most reliable way of overclocking. And if we go down to the bottom here, there's just a couple more things. It is an 8-layer PCB, and they do give you Gelid Solutions GC Extreme Thermal Compound, just kind of as a bonus to give you a little bit more oomph to your cooling solution, depending on what you end up using, as well as high-density power connectors and 15 microns of gold used on the different fingers of the different connectors on this particular board. One last thing before we finish up, I'm just going to drop this down so I can show you guys the specifications on this board. This is a 4th gen, Z87 is for 4th gen Intel Core processors, aka Haswell, which means that they are also not backwards compatible to the 3rd generation or the 2nd generation. It is LGA 1150 only at this particular moment. Also, the memory will get into an expansion slots, so let's go ahead and take a look inside the box. All right, here's all the accessories that come in the box. Start here first with some of the paperwork and the software CD. Looks like they actually provide something from Norton in there as well. You'll also get a case badge if you want to show off the fact that you're rocking an OC formula board in your setup. Also, they're providing for you the home cloud setup, the ASRock home cloud setup. Basically lets you walk through something that you might need to know how to do. And then they also provide for you the setup guide, the software setup guide I should say. That's basically going to show you some of the UEFI settings, kind of flip through a little bit to show you guys that. In case you wanted to know a little bit more about how to set up your particular motherboard at the optimal settings, it's very helpful. And they also have a quick installation guide, and this is basically going to tell you a little bit more about the motherboard, perhaps some instructions on how to install memory as well as the CPU. If you need any help with that though, you can always go to our Newegg TV YouTube channel and check that out as well. We have plenty of videos to help you guys out. Then we also have the rear I/O shield here, and everything is clearly labeled, black and gold, just like the motherboard. Flip around to the back to show you, it's just a standard sheet metal there. And then they also provide for you, looks like a total of 4, yes, 2 right angle and 2 straight serial ATA 3 6 gigabit per second cables here. Actually, they are also backwards compatible to SATA revision 2 and 1. They also provide for you some of these standoffs. So the motherboard standoffs actually typically are meant to be screwed in and then left inside the chassis. But if you don't want to actually use that in a case and you're just doing some overclocking on your desktop, you could just shove these through the bottom of the motherboard and easily just set it up right on your desk. Also providing for you two very small screws, and that is to attach any of your mini PCIe cards or an mSATA drive into the said ports. Show you guys those once we get into the motherboard itself. Also, SLI bridge, standard ribbon style for that. And finally, that gelid thermal solution, or that thermal grease, I should say. So let's go ahead and take a look at the motherboard. Finally, the motherboard, the Z87M OC formula, beautiful in black and gold as she is. Of course, you can see that's actually the color scheme they're going for, is black and gold. Essentially yellow plastic for the slots, but they are going with the gold for the heat sinks here. So pretty hefty, looks nice. Got a little heat pipe going between the two of them. Let me flip it around to the back and show you guys the PCB itself. It's actually sort of a glossy black here, so you can kind of see that as I give you guys a couple reflective shots. But there are some Phillips head screws, so if you did want to remove the hardware and provide your own cooling solution or go water cool with it, you absolutely could do that with this particular motherboard. Let me flip it around again to the front and show you guys a couple things. The fan headers, most importantly, there's 6 fan headers on this particular board. Some of them are 4-pin PWM and some of them are 3-pin. I'll start here at the top. We have 2 fan headers, one of them, both of them for the CPU, but one of them is a 4-pin. And over here we have a third one that's a 3-pin, another 3-pin here, and 2 more at the bottom. One of these is a 4-pin for the chassis and another 3-pin. So there's your total of 6. I do want to start on the bottom right-hand side of the board here, and we'll go across it. First and foremost, we do have a very, very small 4-pin speaker header here, as well as a power LED header. And then we have the front panel header here, allowing you to connect in all your switches and lights to the actual chassis, including another power LED header. Then we have 2 surface-mounted buttons, the power and the reset. Then we do have a very small surface-mounted, I think that's the BIOS, yes it is, that's the clear BIOS switch. Button, I should say, and then below that is actually the BIOS switch, allowing you to switch between one of the 2 UEFI chips or BIOS chips. And over here we do have a clear Cmos jumper. Let me just lift this up slightly so you can get a better look at things. Let's see if I can get it on there. There we go. And there's the 2 UEFI chips, 64 megabytes each on those. To the left of that we have 2 USB 2.0 headers, as well as a COM port header, and those 2 fan headers that I mentioned earlier, as well as an IR header. And all the way over here in the corner we do have an HD audio front panel header as well. And this is actually all of the audio componentry here. And they are using kind of a separation along the PCB here to try and keep this, this analog, or I shouldn't say analog, this audio signal separate from the EMI that could be coming off the rest of the motherboard, and just trying to make it the cleanest possible signal that they could. Also, they even used a shielded cap to go right over the top of that particular Realtek chip. But right above those both, we actually have a very small, let me try and turn it a little bit further, very small half mini PCIe slot here, and then you could obviously use that for something like a wireless card, expansion card, or something like that. Also, you have a battery, keeping the UEFI alive, and below both of those 2 things, we do have all of your PCI expansion slots, PCIe expansion slots, I should say. First and foremost, we do have the primary one, the native one to the Z87 chipset. That is PCIe Gen 3 X16 slot, full-length slot, of course. There is, of course, another one right below that, number 3 slot. That one is also 16X Gen 3. Then the 2 in between them is X1, that's PCIe 2.0, and another PCIe 2.0 4X slot. Now, of course, you were going to rock these in SLI or Crossfire. Both of these are going to drop down to 8X, or I should say, in combination, they're going to run at 8X lane width. But besides that, I want to talk to you guys a little bit more about the Z87 chipset, which is hiding right underneath that particular heatsink. Z87 chipset, of course, offering you guys several benefits. First and foremost being 6 USB 3.0, as well as 6 SATA Rev 3 6 gigabit per second ports, and of course providing you with the ability to RAID them. But let me just actually show you. It should be RAID 0, 1, 5, and 10. But a couple things I actually want to mention about these 6 different ports. A couple special things. The SATA 0 and 1 ports here actually are shared with the eSATA connector on the rear panel, and that's only important if you decide you need to use something with eSATA. Most people actually don't, but if you decided to do that, you would be concerned, you would have concern because it would be sharing some of the resources with that. The one in the middle actually doesn't share with anything, but this one, SATA 3 and 4 ports, are actually being shared with the mSATA / mini PCIe slot, which is essentially something that I just realized I forgot. So I actually have to go backwards and show you guys that real quick. Let's see, let me get this down here real quick. Right between these 2 ports, I apologize guys, but this is essentially the mSATA port as well as the mini PCIe port. Obviously use this for more expansion, and obviously another storage device if you decided you wanted to do something like that and give a little bit of speed out of it, as well as the additional advantages of the throughput there. But aside from that, that's essentially the 2 concerns you really want to worry about if you're using the eSATA port on the back of the front panel, or excuse me, the rear panel I/O, or if you end up using this particular slot. Then if you were to do that, then you would have to worry about sharing some resources. So definitely stick to the middle too. But moving right across to the other side, right above the SATA ports, we do have the USB port that's actually here, and this is for ASRock's Instant Flash. Basically allowing you to flash the UEFI with a USB flash drive and possibly save the board if you can't actually boot it. So it's very helpful. Next to that, we do have a USB 3.0 header, and that is for the front panel, so therefore you could get some USB 3.0 connectivity. And the very top here, or right above that I should say, is the 24-pin ATX power connector providing power for the motherboard. Above that, we do have a LED debug helping to quickly identify any issues with this particular motherboard if something were to happen, the memory's bad, or you know, the CPU's not working properly. Any number of things that could possibly go wrong, it's going to have different codes to look up to be able to help you identify that and troubleshoot it. Above that, we do have 2 dip switches. The top one is for slow mode, essentially allowing the CPU to run in the slowest possible speeds. And below that, we do have the LN2 mode, which is essentially if you were going to try to avoid the cold bug if you're using liquid nitrogen and starting up the system at extremely cold temperatures. It basically allows you to boot up and use that. Very, very tiny are right here to the right of both those dip switches are some LEDs, and there are 4 of them to help you try and troubleshoot. We have the CPU LED, the DRAM one, let's see, we have the VGA LED, and the last one is the boot LED, telling you if there's a problem with the boot device. And finally on to the Ddr Ram slots. Of course, you do have 4 of them, and at a maximum of 8 gigabytes per slot, you get a total of 32 gigabytes of memory for this particular motherboard, as well as many other motherboards. But that being said, it officially accepts 1600 mega transfers per second thanks to the Haswell setup and the memory controller on there, but depending on the memory you purchase as well as your CPU, you could overclock it to up to 3000 mega transfers per second and beyond. So it also supports XMP, Intel's Extreme Memory Profiles, versions 1.3 and 1.2. And just to the left of that, you can already see it, is the LGA 1150 socket. That is, of course, for Intel's 4th generation core processors, as well as it being the AKA Haswell processor. You guys are more familiar with that. But essentially allowing you to use things like an iGPU, so if you don't want to actually buy a video card, you don't have to. You could just buy one of those processors and be able to drop it right in and use it just for a workstation or something else. But besides that, right around the outside here, we do have the power delivery. I'll tilt that to the side so you can get a better look at it. And you can see some of the MOSFETs and some of the chokes here. Actually, you can see mainly the chokes. But besides that, and also some capacitors as well, providing the cleanest possible power for the CPU to be able to overclock and be stable. And if I flip it back up again, whoops, just missed it. There we go. And we do have the heat pipe that's going between the 2 heat sinks and allowing it to keep it nice and cool and stable. On the upper left, we do have the 8-pin CPU supplemental power for the CPU, I should say. I'll flip this around to the front of the rear panel, excuse me. tilt this up just a little bit so you guys can get a clear shot of it. Finally, on to the rear panel I/O. So we have a total of 2 USB 2.0 on the back, as well as a PS2 connector if you have a legacy keyboard or mouse. We do have the iGPU supplying you with some video outs here. We have the DisplayPort out as well as HDMI, but we also have that HDMI-In, which is quite a nice feature, since if you just want to stick to one particular system running all the video right through it, you could use that, as opposed to, you know, maybe you don't have an extra source on your LCD or something like that. It'd be a good solution for you. Also, another way of clearing the Cmos on the outside of the system. This way you don't have to pop anything open, do any jumpers, push any buttons on the inside of the case. You just push it right here and you're reset. We do have 6 more USB 3.0 ports, as well as 1 eSATA port. And we do have a NIC here. It's a gigabit Ethernet port, RJ45 I should say, but it is being powered by an Intel i217V chip, so always nice to have Intel running the show for us. I like their chips. And we do have the Realtek audio out and a TOS link out if you're into digital audio. Okay, everybody, that's going to wrap up this overview of ASRock's Z87M OC Formula motherboard. If you guys liked what you saw today, don't forget to click the like button, and if you haven't already done so, click subscribe to any of our various YouTube channels, and we'll see you soon.